I bet you all know this painting. I don't even have to tell you its name, who painted it, or its reputation in the art world. The first two are such common knowledge, with the third being an opinion that's shared so commonly that it's almost pointless to dispute. There are so many books, professional papers, and personal experiences shared about the painting that it's staggering, and the consensus is generally the same. In a word, it's a masterpiece. I don't like to use that word often, partly because it's overused in the common vernacular online, but also, I've rarely found something that is so infinitely divisible in its layers and captivating to study that it never fails to make me awestruck, thus qualifying it as a masterpiece in my eyes. There are plenty of films, books, TV shows, and video games that I love and will praise to the high heaven, but there is one above them all. In the words of the author of the play it was based on, it's the one that is true yesterday, true today, and true tomorrow. The very definition of old Hollywood and a timeless classic. Welcome to Casablanca. I first saw Casablanca almost on a whim. As you probably know if you've seen my other videos, I'm a huge fan of James Bond, with Pierce Brosnan being my introduction into the franchise. The thing that made him a name in the industry first was Remington Steele, which I sought out afterwards and really liked it. One of the running character jokes with Remington was that he loved old movies and would often draw inspiration from them, and I remember Casablanca was frequently cited. Given that I hadn't seen too many classic movies at that point, I put together a list and began to work through it. I don't know if Casablanca was the first, but it was one of the first, and I was instantly drawn to it. It tops more professional greatest movies of all time lists that I have seen than perhaps any other, with the possible exceptions of Citizen Kane, The Godfather, and The Wizard of Oz. So how could I not be intrigued? Like with many legendary films, there are many legends about the production, and it can be difficult to separate fact from fiction. Suffice it to say, the making of Casablanca is worth a movie itself. We're accustomed to talking about Hollywood today as being run like businesses and shelling out products rather than art. Funny story, that's always how Hollywood was run. During the Golden Age, each movie studio would have talented directors, actors, and artisans sign exclusive contracts, and would be making about 50 or so movies a year. It was a factory, and the executives trusted their employees to make something worthwhile. Casablanca was based on a play called Everybody Comes to Rick's. When writers Murray Bennett and Joan Allison couldn't get it produced, they sent it out to Hollywood, where a script reader at Warner Brothers happened to read it the day after Pearl Harbor. The reader then sent a memo with a summary to Hal B. Wallace, recommending the purchase of the script. It was bought for $20,000 and was instantly put on track for production, with Casey Robinson and then the Epstein brothers with Howard Koch writing the script. Despite a press release claiming Ronald Reagan was cast and a subsequent offer to George Raft, it was always intended as a vehicle for Humphrey Bogart. William Wyler was first considered as director, but the job eventually went to Michael Curtiz, who commenced shooting without a finished script. When the film was completed, it benefited from a bit of good timing. The Allies invaded North Africa and captured Casablanca in November 1942, with a high-level conference involving FDR and Churchill the following January. So the film was rushed into theaters and had a solid, though not spectacular box office run numbers-wise. At the Oscars, it was nominated for 8 awards and took home 3, including Best Picture. Reviews have been extraordinarily kind to it, and even those that don't like it seem to respect it. Today, Casablanca is one of the most beloved films of all time, with numerous popular quotes, placement on many greatest films of all time lists like I mentioned, and being included as one of the first 25 films to be preserved in the National Film Registry here in the US. In the midst of World War II, refugees fleeing Europe are left to their own devices to flee the Nazi regime. One popular way out is to go south into North Africa and head to Casablanca, take a plane from there to Lisbon, and then fly out to America. Casablanca, unfortunately, is a bit of a chokehold. Many want to leave, but there are so few opportunities that many end up waiting and waiting for a miracle. One day, 2 German couriers are killed. They were carrying letters of transit, which is essentially free passage out of French soil that cannot be questioned, and these letters were stolen during the murder. They come into the possession of a cut-rate criminal, Ugarte, who makes a deal with Victor Lazlo, an underground resistance leader, to meet at Rick's cafe at Casablanca for the letters. But before the exchange can be made, Ugarte is captured by the authorities. Fortunately, he left the letters in the care of the owner of the cafe, Richard Blaine. However, Rick is refusing to let Lazlo have them due to his heart having been broken in the past by Lazlo's wife, Ilsa. With a major leader in the Nazi army in cohorts with the French prefect of police closing in on Lazlo, time is running out, and it's up to Ilsa to convince Rick to set aside his hurt feelings and allow for Victor to leave to continue the fight against evil. Trying to be the definitive review or look at this film is a bit foolhardy. There's far too much to cover, and I can't imagine a cohesive structure that would let me tackle every little note I or others have made about it. All I can do is talk about my emotional attachment to the film and share examples of why I feel the way I do, which is pretty much what I've done for every other film I've covered so far. But Casablanca is particularly tricky because I've been drawn to elements of it at different times. One day, it might be the love story that speaks to me. Another, it might be the intense patriotic and political undertones. Another, it might be the witty humor and underlying humanity. Another, it might be the character study of a broken freedom fighter who rejoins the fight. It's an elusive movie to try and pin down one overarching reason I like it, because I'm always finding something fresh or rediscovering my attachment to something else. This is a movie that offers a new experience virtually every time I've watched it, including the 4 I did in preparation for this review, and I never get tired of it. What's most surprising about this whole package is that it's lacking some of the trademarks I would imagine the great works of art to have if you go by the standards held by most modern reviewers. It was written by a group of writers who didn't really communicate with each other, thus being the definition of the dreaded critical term written by committee. The director hardly spoke English and so had trouble communicating with his cast. He also wasn't interested in specific shots drawing attention to themselves or other elements existing for their own sake, showing off his artistic side, so to speak. It's all about a story and its characters for the creators, and everything else exists to serve that focus. The characters themselves have largely been described as archetypes, which we've seen before. In short, this movie isn't shining a spotlight on its cinematic or storytelling techniques and asking you to admire its genius, or is doing anything particularly new even for its day. Rather, Casablanca is employing the techniques to tell its story in a matter-of-fact way, unconcerned with whether or not it can be put up in a museum. And this desire to not force itself into being art is ironically the thing that makes it so. The unpretentiousness of Casablanca is something I miss these days from films. On my most recent viewing, I kept noticing the theme of truth versus fiction. We see it in existence heightened by theatrical devices and artistic liberties, and almost every character is living within a manufactured construct, unaware of the big picture. Some cling to hope, others their own selfish interests and are just surviving within a supposedly free state that's not really such. About those artistic liberties, there are historical details the film gets wrong, some pretty egregious plot contrivances to make the story work, and Curtiz directs the film without much concern about being factual. For example, the passage this film claims refugees went through wasn't really a common path, and certainly not during the early 1940s. If the letters of transit cannot be questioned or rescinded, why is there a chance of the Nazis holding Lazlo hostage in spite of that? Who then are the letters of transit intended to be checked by if not the Nazis? Why is the searchlight we see all throughout shown across buildings at ground level when it should be pointed up in the sky as a signal for airplanes? Why is Rick drenched when reading Ilsa's note and then mostly dry when he gets on the train immediately afterwards? But all of that is kind of a moot point as we watch these characters go through a life-changing experience that reaffirms the real truth, and all of this, by the way, takes place over only 3 days. Richard Blaine is a man who creates a shell of cynicism to hide his heart. He once fought for idealistic principles on several occasions despite being on the losing side, but his beliefs in the higher virtues get shattered when the great love of his life doesn't show up at the train station. As the rain comes down on the note, being a substitute for the tears of Rick's heart, he tosses the note away like garbage and resolves only to look out for himself. He lands in Casablanca with his friend Sam to open a saloon, and the day-to-day life of the city requires Rick to be cautious. The city is technically free French soil, but this is a pithy facade, hiding the fact that this is Nazi territory. Rick knows where the powers lie and isn't concerned with disrupting the balance of power, but he also doesn't align himself with them. He intends to stay and survive long after the current regime. Thus, he says just enough not to give the Nazis a reason to lock him up without being their friend. He's in a limbo of sorts, never wanting to grow or change his situation, as he believes there's not much point to rocking the boat or to being a good man anymore. As he repeatedly says, "I stick my neck out for nobody." The first shot we see of him showcases the game of chess, a lovely nod to the complicated situation in Casablanca, as well as being a favorite pastime of Bogart's. Ugarte comes to him and asks him to keep the letters of transit safe, but Rick is very aware of the danger given what Ugarte had to do to get the letters, and knows not to do anything more for him. In an act of coldness, Rick refuses to shelter Ugarte. Just from this opening, you might think Rick is no longer a feeling man, but this is simply not true. His conversations with Renault reveal as much about him as his silence does, and his simple gesture of affection towards Sam as he passes by, coupled with the brand of loyalty we see from his workers, clues us in that he is not as dead inside as he seems to be. All of this is established before Ilsa comes back into his life, a full 30 minutes into the film. And we don't need a line of dialogue from either of them to know exactly what kind of relationship they had. With a couple of shots and a bit of underscore, we know what Rick and Ilsa meant to each other, and that she's probably the reason he's so cynical now. When Lazlo and Renault come back, Rick and Ilsa are nothing if not cordial to each other, but the underscore keeps our mind on the sadness of this reunion. Later that night, we get the flashback to show us the relationship. By the way, notice how the lead-in isn't a typical zoom-in shot. It starts, pauses, Rick is about to say something and then stops himself, and then we continue to zoom before finally dissolving into a hazy fade-in. The flashback gives us surprisingly little spoken details about the relationship. There's a good minute or so with no dialogue, and it's played as the most stereotypical of romantic memories, with even the rear projection conforming to how we remember things versus the reality of it. When the dialogue does start, we don't learn much about their respective backgrounds. We don't know how they met, how they fell in love, or anything we might typically get from a romance film. And it's not important. What is important is the strength of their bond, their chemistry, and how this time is coated with the happiest of feelings, laughter, passion, that sort of thing. We need this in order to understand why her leaving him is so devastating. This is that once-in-a-lifetime love many of us might not get, and both of them are fully aware they will never have another relationship like this. After the flashback, not a word is spoken before Ilsa comes in. She is here out of the goodness of her heart. She wants to give Rick the cathartic closure she couldn't give originally. But when she sees the depth of his self-pity and how he's constructed a hateful story to explain her departure, she refuses to share the real reason she left, believing it would fall on deaf ears. The story then shifts to show how impossible it is for her and Lazlo to leave without the letters of transit. We see how important Lazlo is to the underground resistance, and we see how and why Ilsa loves Victor enough to risk her life by staying with him. Thus, when Ilsa comes to the apartment to persuade Rick to hand over the letters, the two sides pulling apart her heart are perfectly set up, and we understand fully what is actually happening in this scene. Ilsa is torn between her true love for Rick and her belief in Lazlo's cause, and she can't seem to commit to either. Rick even gives her a chance to commit to the idealism of Lazlo's cause that she professes to be more important, but she can't pull the trigger. For Rick, her reaction demonstrates to him that his fiction about why she left is wrong. He doesn't yet know the facts, but he sees how much leaving him tore her apart, and that she still loves him as fiercely as he loves her. As she sobs, he's now convinced their time in Paris was not a ruse, and that she was as authentic in her feelings as he was in his. Ilsa then shares why she left, and confesses she doesn't know how to proceed. She asks Rick to do the thinking for them both, basically, decide their destiny. Rick also spends time with Lazlo and is extremely impressed with the depth of his conviction. He comprehends the importance of Lazlo to the movement, which is fighting a fight he was once a part of. Rick then comes up with an inspired solution, which may have been motivated by something Ilsa said to him. There's so much at stake, and all you can think of is your own feelings. One woman hurt you, and you take your revenge on the rest of the world. This is Rick's opportunity for change, and he has two choices: be with Ilsa, or allow her and Lazlo to leave. He chooses the latter, putting aside his own feelings for the sake of the fight. However passionate the love between Rick and Ilsa is, her love for Victor and his love for her contributes to a better future. Poetically, Rick is content to let her leave for the same reason she left the first time: to fight the good fight. However, he resolves not to retreat back into his cafe again to sulk. He settles his affairs and plans to leave Casablanca and probably go on and continue the fight in his own way. In essence, he commits a self-sacrifice, the kind he seemed determined never to do when he lived by that original mantra, "I stick my neck out for nobody." It's a beautiful tragedy, coated with the bittersweetness and hope it needs to be a perfect ending to Rick's story. He no longer lives with the agony of her absence. He voluntarily lets her go, knowing full well the implications. And all of this is made possible by the truthful confessions they made to each other the previous night, which dismantles the fiction Rick governed his life by. The film is telling us truth may be painful, but it's the only way to legitimate freedom. It's no wonder why when most people think of this film, they think of it as a love story first. However, the political aspects are just as big a part of the film as the romance, and it's something I've grown to appreciate more and more as I grow older. Given that this was written and made right during the middle of World War II, there was no telling which way the wind was going to blow and if the Axis powers would be successful. Yet Warner Brothers at the time was an active voice against the Third Reich, and was confidently portraying them as the bad guys in several pictures. They would even hire European refugees as part of their staff. Fun fact, the majority of the cast in this film were not born in America, and that makes a big difference in supporting the political undertone of this film. Many of them experienced a similar journey to the States that the film's characters did, thus they brought an authenticity to their performances. Probably my favorite scene in the whole film is the duel between the musical anthems in the cafe. It moves me nearly to tears every time to see these people sing an anthem of defiance against evil and share a patriotic dream. Particularly these shots of Madeleine LeBeau, who plays Yvonne, illustrates this point. Just before the music starts, you see a quick shot of her German companion singing with the Nazis, and she holds her head down in disgust and shame. She's a character that's been caught up in the shifting tides of Casablanca, willing to be with whoever she has to be to better her situation. Yet she remembers her true allegiance and bellows out the lyrics through tears. This scene is so effective because we're being shown how much the people of Casablanca wish to break free of the Nazi grip. They live an existence of double talk and political maneuvers, yet they long to be free again. Despite never depicting a battle or the true horrors of the Nazi regime, this is one of the most vehement anti-Nazi films I have ever seen. Roger Ebert once said that the films that really make him cry are the inspirational ones, where people stand up for their beliefs and embrace the better angels of their natures, and I agree with them. The uplifting feel of this film is dependent on all its players, and I've only really talked about Rick and Ilsa so far. Victor Lazlo is an essential character to both the politics and the love story. Over the years, several critics have mentioned how much of a stiff Paul Henri is in this. I admit he can come off as a steadfast and immovable object, untouched by fragile or personal sentimentality or selfish desire. That being said, I kinda hate how much flack Henri gets for this part. Yes, his guiding belief in freedom, his Northern Star if you will, is ever present and dominates much of his interactions, to the point where he seems one-dimensional. But remember his love for Ilsa. If the cause is so important and should be above his own feelings, he would have left Ilsa a long time ago since she was a threat to his safety at multiple points. But he never could bring himself to do it. Why? Because he's a human, just like us. Victor succeeds at being the most noble and mature character in the film, but he also shows he's not above wanting something for himself. And Ilsa brings out that humanity, and I believe her attraction to him. It takes a particular class of actor to believably pull off both aspects in a performance, and it reminds me a bit of Christopher Reeve's approach to Superman. Reeve's Superman is the ideal we strive towards, but he's very human, prone to emotional outbursts and making ill-advised choices. Neither the love story nor the political message of Casablanca would have been as effective if we didn't believe in Henri's performance. And given how bright this film's light shines even today, I would say he succeeded. Captain Renault is the kindred spirit to Rick. He also knows how to play the game of deception, but the major difference is that Renault goes a step further in actually cooperating with the Nazis, though he certainly does not believe in their cause. In his heart, he knows better, but he sees no point to fighting back. As he sees Rick make that self-sacrifice at the end, he too decides he can no longer serve the Nazis and goes to leave Casablanca with Rick. Claude Rains was one of the finest character actors of old Hollywood, and this is my favorite performance of his. He was rightly nominated for an Oscar. What strikes me about this is another observation Ebert once made about Renault. Watch his scenes throughout and pay attention to the subtext. It's never about him. He's never the focal point of the discussion. He's the best kind of supporting player. He beautifully gives back to the other actors to make them shine, thus making himself a welcome and memorable presence throughout. He is what I wish all supporting characters and stories would be, an unselfish part of the cast, never unduly taking the spotlight away from where it should be to serve his own ego. It's a magnificent work from a gifted actor. Rick, Ilsa, Victor, and Renault are the four primary characters in terms of screen time, but it's amazing how memorable everybody else seems to be. From Sam to Sasha, from Ugarte to Ferrari, from Carl to Anina. Each feels like a real person and is worthy of their accolades. For some, like Ugarte and Ferrari, these became the de facto roles we picture when we think of actors Peter Lorre and Sidney Greenstreet, despite their small amount of screen time. Major Heinrich Strasser is another example of this. He has far more screen time than most, and Conrad Veidt plays a deliciously menacing and looming threat to these people's lives. Veidt was also a terrific actor. If you're unfamiliar with his larger work, please go seek it out. For DC Comics fans, the Joker wouldn't exist if not for this actor. Yet I feel bad for Veidt. He was a German man who was hardcore against Hitler, yet he often played German bad guys in Hollywood as he felt doing so would help the war effort against the Nazis. He was actually the highest paid actor in the film, and this was the last performance he did that was released during his lifetime. What a wonderful combination of actor to role. Of course, it probably goes without saying that the roles of Rick and Ilsa were tailor-made for Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman. Bogart was often the tough guy gangster in films, partly because he just looks the part and plays it so well. But Casablanca was a turning point for him. This was his first romantic leading part, and coupled with the Maltese Falcon and High Sierra, he became an A-lister shortly afterwards. When you look at Bogart, you might not think of a glossy and passionate romantic leading man, yet that's exactly why he works here. The cynicism, world-weariness, and humor come naturally from him, but there's also a sincerity to his scenes with Bergman, and I have no problem believing the two are in love. Bergman is also perfect as Ilsa. There's a lustrous quality to her, matched with a personal reality that she brings to every role she plays. When Ingrid listens to an actor, her eyes are not static. She studies every aspect of the person's face and is fully committed to the moment. Ingrid has an amazing responsibility of portraying a lovelorn woman full of self-doubt that instantly can switch back to standing her ground and confidently exude a strong defense and not making it jarring. Alongside Audrey Hepburn, she's one of my favorite actresses from the 20th century, and like with some of the other players in this film, this is my favorite of her roles. None of what I've talked about so far would work if the script wasn't equal in stature to its performers. Despite being worked on by several writers, this is an amazingly cohesive script that feels like it's a work of singular vision. It's got subtext, eloquence, stark realism, a pulpy coloring to a lot of its presentation, and humor. My goodness, this is one of the funniest scripts I've seen from a non-comedic film, and so much of it is dramatic irony and throwaway gags that have me in stitches. It's no wonder Casablanca is one of the most quotable films of all time. In addition to the standards of "Here's Looking at You, Kid" and "Of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world," you have bits like,
"What is your nationality?"
I'm a drunkard.
I'm shocked to find that gambling is going on in here.
This place is full of vultures everywhere.
Make it 10. I'm only a poor, corrupt official.
If I possessed a quarter of the talent for dialogue this script has, I could be making a good living in Hollywood right now. Now, I could go on, waxing lyrical about the production elements. Instead, I'd like to try something a little different. I'm going to point out various moments of the film, highlighting one or more departments, and I hope they help to give you an understanding of why I feel like I haven't taken in everything about the film even over my 15+ years of viewings. Let's start with the visuals. Ever notice that the Germans are often taller than other characters like Renault and Rick? Ilsa is almost always shot from her left side. Watch what the hats do to the shadows on the characters' faces to help frame them. Speaking of shadows, ever notice that the scenes with the darkest lighting are the ones where the characters are at their most vulnerable? Pay attention to the background shadows in Rick and Ilsa's scene the second night, the crossguard with lights, how much the light and shadows are fighting against each other, perfectly symbolizing the inner turmoil of the characters. The camera placement is deliberate and wonderfully thoughtful. Instead of following stage conventions that have every actor's face visible to the audience, the camera is often placed behind people's backs to help give you a sense of immersion within the room. This early scene with Rick and Renault in his office where he gets the money has the camera right where the wall physically would be, thus ignoring reality and letting you have the best view of these characters and doing it in one shot. How about the music? From the opening 5 minutes of this movie, it's almost another 25 minutes in before we hear the underscore again, which is when Rick sees Ilsa. All the music in between is diegetic music played in the cafe. If you're not familiar with the popular songs being played throughout the film, look them up. There are some surprisingly poignant choices, like Heaven Can Wait when Rick meets Major Strasser, or Parlez-moi d'amour when Ilsa enters the cafe for the first time. Max Steiner is a legend amongst film composers. Despite him not initially wanting to use As Time Goes By as a tune within the film, circumstances overruled him, and it's incorporated throughout. Listening to the appearances in the score go from wonderfully romantic to tragically heartbreaking, it's a testament to how the right orchestration can make more of a simple melody than you thought possible. Steiner's use of anthems is also commendable. Note that in the transition from Rick's cafe to the prefect's office about 50 minutes in, we hear the French anthem, but then the end of the statement twists it to sound a bit more like the German marches in the film, symbolizing Renault's position with Major Strasser. A more obvious musical use is in the anthem duel. It starts out as just the instruments in the cafe, but then Steiner turns it into a full, rousing orchestration to give it strength. It's masterful. As we start to close this review, I want to briefly mention the film's legacy and its follow-ups. Critically acclaimed flicks like La La Land make allusions to it. There's a great Looney Tunes parody of the film called Casablanca. There have also been blatant cash-ins and rip-offs, like Havana, Cabo Blanco, and Barbed Wire. And Food Fight, one of the worst films I've ever seen, feels the need to make references right and left. There were a few adaptations for radio and television. The first radio production reunited Bogart, Bergman, and Enried. And there have been several attempts at sequels or remakes with a few published sequel books. Probably the most ill-advised project to me was a reported attempt in 2012 that would have followed Rick and Ilsa's illegitimate son to search for his father. Just no. This film's story is so singular and so decisively wrapped up that I never wanted to know anything that happens before or after it. It's not important. Everything we need to know is right here within the film. And I have a hard time imagining a follow-up that would add to my appreciation of the film. Leave it alone. Sure, this film has flaws that can be pointed out, but all the ones I could bring up seem trivial, like the historical accuracy ones. As I've said throughout the video, Casablanca isn't concerned with factual reality, and it communicates that right from the beginning. It's concerned with emotional truth. In this city living in a lie filled with liars, a story unfolds using cinematic tricks to reveal the lies our main characters cling to and ends with the main players resolving to learn from their mistakes and be better, to embrace the truth, even at the expense of love. Unlike most movies about romance, this suggests that there are some things that surpass romantic love in importance. Obviously, love is one of the strongest emotions we have, and it can bring authentic joy to our lives if done correctly. But if love is standing in the way of a better future for others, don't we have an obligation to step aside and let the greater good win out? That's not an easy question to answer, or rather, to live with. And because Casablanca makes me think about my convictions, asks me to reaffirm what I believe, and challenges me to think about the big picture, it leaves a lasting impact on me. There might be more technically impressive films or ones with greater story depth. But when asked about the film that means the most to me and reminds me of the power of cinema, I point to Casablanca, the masterpiece. It's a hypnotic and enchanting motion picture that transcends its film strip and finds a place in the annals of cinematic history. Its influence seems to be never-ending. It was true yesterday, it is true today, and it'll be true tomorrow. And I don't want my next viewing to be the last. Of all the movies I've seen, this is my favorite, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.